I loved it. It's one of those films that basically doesn't put a foot wrong, and they are so rare. It's a film in which, I mean, I've seen it the once. I need to go back and see it again, but I can't think of anything that's actually wrong with it. Everything from Kate Blanchett's fantastically sturdy yet tremulous performance as, a society woman with everything to lose, to Ed Lachman's super 16mm photography, which lends that texture and that depth that feels like you're really getting into the mid-century milieu. I think what Rooney Mara brings to the role is both an inquisitiveness and an innocence that means that you're not quite sure how events are going to play out. And I love that. I love the fact that, very much in keeping with the source material, it sort of plays as a romance, but also as a mystery. There is a hint of Douglas Sirk melodrama, the kind of the pain behind the picket fence facade, but there's also that sense that it might be turning into a crime thriller, a gun in a suitcase, love as a crime scene. And all the way through, all these different textures are playing in and out of the movie in a way which I think, is ultimately due to Todd Haynes. I mean, Kate Blanchett, fantastic script by Fosnagi Script. It's just really, really good, very, very uncluttered. And I know from in the interview, Kate Blanchett was saying she's been with the project for a long time, and then Todd Haynes came to her and said, "Are you still attached to this?" For me, it's kind of like the culmination of his films. It has the subversiveness of Poison, which was his Jean Genet portmanteau.
It was his what?
He made a film that was based on the writings of Jean Genet a long time ago. But in fact, funnily enough, and this is going to sound weird, when Radio 5 was Radio 5, before it was Radio 5 Live, I got Todd Haynes to come on the programme to talk about Poison, which was the strangest discussion in the middle of a station that was also doing sports and children's broadcasting at that point. It was very, very young Todd Haynes, and obviously he'd made Karen Carpenter Superstar, which was, a story about anorexia, still suppressed because, didn't clear the rights. It has that, the rich period detail of Far From Heaven, also the character insight of Safe, which is just such a wonderful movie. And it just looks like all those things that I've always loved about Todd Haynes have all come together in a package, which actually, interestingly enough, I think is surprisingly mainstream, despite how ambitious it is and how much there are things about it that are completely subversive. When we first meet the starstruck couple, we kind of meet them as if by accident. That the original, the Patricia Highsmith story, was jointly inspired by a woman that she served in a department store, and also by the experiences of a former partner of hers about custody. And so there's an awful lot of personal stuff going on in that. And at the beginning, as we meet, it's almost like a brief encounter meeting. We see a couple sort of saying goodbye, and then we flash back from that to the relationship, and we see how things play out. And everything about it is absolutely, and you said at one point, I think, it's a film that looks beautiful. It's not just that it looks beautiful, it's that it is designed so perfectly. It's not just that the period setting, the milieu, is beautifully captured. It's that when you look at Sandy Powell's costumes, what they're doing is leading you through the story. They're lending an angular edge to the relationship, but without shouting it from the rooftops. I think you have an extraordinary pair of performances with Kate Blanchett and Rooney Mara. Kate Blanchett, it's all about this kind of extraordinary facial ballet. I mean, her face does the most remarkable things with the tiniest gestures. She goes, from being, on the one hand, slightly sort of haughty and or slyly seductive, to being also uncertain. And Rooney Mara, on the other hand, it's all to do with the eyes. It's everything about her performance is in the eyes, and to watch the two of them together, there's a couple of scenes in which it is literally just them talking. I think it's fantastic. And what Todd Haynes understands is, when you have performances working at that level, the trick is slightly to stand back and to let the performances do the job. What I also like about it is that it's got this constant sort of visual motif that they're constantly separated from each other. They're always looking at each other through glass or through smoke. There's an awful lot of smoking. There's an awful lot of and it's very symbolic smoking. It always means more than it appears to mean.
What does it mean?
Well, for a long time in movies, cigarettes were used as a stand-in for. They were sort of an erotic substitute, because when you're talking about sort of older cinema, lighting a cigarette meant a lot of things, and it could often be a substitute for what we'd now have as a sort of sex scene. And the other remarkable thing about the film is that Sandy Powell's costumes are so important that in the few moments of nakedness, it's not the nakedness that startles, it's the absence of costume, because you've become so used to being led through the drama by the costume. You do get this sense of passion. You also get a sense of stillness about it and of the subversiveness of the material. But at no point, I mean, it was interesting when you're talking about, how you define things. I mean, it is essentially a romance, a love story, and yet it also has that, as I said, that film noir element. It also has that sense of, there's a slight criminal element. There's a private detective. There's the fact that you were operating on the fringes of society, and yes, it does have the anguish of forbidden love about it, but it also has something much more tender, much more generous, much more positive. Again, this is something that you touched on in the interview. It has something which is much more affirmative. I mean, I could spend the rest of the show talking to you about all the things about the film that I liked, but at the heart of it is, it seems like the perfect symphony of a wonderful script, a really interesting central text, two performers at the height of their powers who absolutely, care for and love the material, superb cinematography, all brought together by Todd Haynes, who for me is somebody who really does bridge the gap between the, art house experimentation and now full mainstream adoration. One of the movies of the year, without a doubt.